Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Katherine. If you are a returning viewer or listener, then thank you for rejoining me after what feels like a very long hiatus. If this is your first listening, then it won't be as significant to you, but I have been off for a while and I'm absolutely thrilled to be back. I really am. So thank you everybody for joining me in this upload. I hope you find the content edifying. And as I always say, please feel free to share any inspirations with me. I love to learn. I live to learn. So, in the comments or whatever, or an email if you want, share any inspiration with me that you feel that I would benefit from, because I'm a complete open book, if that's the correct phrase. But anyway, let's get on with the upload. This upload is about the voice of God, which for me is one of the more interesting, dare I say, aspects of our relationship with God. The voice of God has so many deeply mystical qualities. It's the umbilicum sensum meus fontem in terra. It is our lifeline. It's the thing that connects us to what we are at source. The voice of God not only tells you what you are doing here in the first place, it also tells me what is required of us, and it tells us how to meet that requirement, and so much more. But I'm going to focus as much as I can on what I think are the four most important things that we should think about when it comes to the voice of God. If you're not someone who is already really deep into this subject, and as I say, please share any inspirations and so on that you have. But if you're new to this idea, if you're new to thinking about the voice of God as a concept in and of itself, then there are four things that I'm going to share with you in this upload that I think are valuable. Now, we're at different stages in life and we all want different things. So for those of you who are now more spiritually inclined, having fulfilled the desires impressed on you throughout the course of your lives, rest assured that what the voice of God communicates to you next will align with this new focus of yours. For all the rest of us, it is imperative that we, as Neville Goddard says, put first things first. We've been given a very specific mandate, and we fulfill that mandate by fulfilling the desires that are impressed on us. So if your desires are spiritual in nature, then yes, please focus on those. But if they're not, it's important that you don't try to rush ahead and try to synthesize or to make up by yourself new desires for yourself. All you need to do is take care of what you've been given to do in any given dispensation. Everything will take care of itself. The great author knows how everything is supposed to play out. The drama is all sewn up. We've all got our parts to play. That's all we have to do. Take your eyes off what someone else is doing or saying and focus on fulfilling the desires that exist within yourself. Now, it goes without saying that we will all continue to live normal human existences. We'll go to work, we'll have children, we'll get married, we'll do all sorts of weird and wonderful things to our human bodies. All of that is fine, but our experiences of those existences will evolve the more we get to understand and to hear and respond to the voice of God. Now, I want to slip in here that when I talk about metaphysical things, when I share metaphysical intellections, I always strip them back to make them digestible and accessible to everyone. And I make no exception here. So if you have specific questions about what I talk about in this upload and you want me to go a bit deeper, then you can contact me via my website. I'll put the link to that in the description box below, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I'm kind of on top of emails at the moment, which is exciting, but please keep the question brief, to no more than a sentence if possible. If you want to know a bit more, as I say, of the sort of the deeper metaphysical side of things, then do get in touch. But as I say, for this upload, I want to make the information digestible and accessible to everyone, so I'm going to strip it back to the bare bones. Now, you might not have heard me talk about the Trinity that we are. Neville Goddard, whose name you will hear very often from me, does touch on this in a couple of his lectures. The ones that come to mind are I Am the Lord and God Speaks to Man. I believe that's the title. I Am the Lord is one and God Speaks to Man. Now, these lectures are both freely available online as part of the wonderful resource, realneville.com. I'll put that link below as well. And in a nutshell, this teaching of the Trinity pertains to you and to me as the Trinity rather than the God or religious Trinity that some of us may know about, and goes deeper than our understanding of ourselves as a duality. And so to touch on that briefly, to touch on this idea of ourselves as a Trinity, I'll explain it thusly. So we are first the individualized concepts of God. So we're birthed by God as individualized concepts of himself at source. So that is us as pure, unadulterated, non-judgment or love. So that's the first element or part of the Trinity. Then secondly, we are robed in the restorable male and female soul emanations, which are the beings that are restored every time we cycle. So every time we put off a human garment, our male and female soul emanations cycle. And then finally, we are wrapped in human garments through which we perform our mandated roles. So this idea of us as individualized concepts of God that are clothed first in male and female soul emanations help to explain the experiences that some of us have as we're going through our cycles. And then the final part of the Trinity is that we are wrapped in the human garments through which we exist in the world. And so we know that everything that exists rather in the physical world is a typification of the world of the wondrous, also, as Neville tells us, called the fourth dimension. And this is why we have religious leaders. Religious leaders are symbolically the middlemen or the middle persons, to be politically correct. And they represent the soul emanations of ourselves as a Trinity. And our soul emanations stand between us as pure unadulterated God and our human expressions, just as religious leaders represent that in the physical world. So they stand between us and God, but in reality, they're just representing our dimensionally greater selves that I talk about often, that stand between our humanity and ourselves as the individualized concepts of God. Now, as human beings, we wouldn't be able to withstand God. We wouldn't be able to house God in God's original form in our human bodies. And that's touched on in the Bible in Mark chapter 2, verse 22, and Matthew chapter 9, verse 17. So we can't put unadulterated God into these wineskins, okay, or new wine into old bottles. Not going into that now. I said I was going to keep it simple, but those chapters, Mark 2:22 and Matthew 9:17, touch on those ideas. And there are all kinds of fascinating situations that arise from this setup, from this Trinity business that I'm just talking about. But if it does nothing else, I hope that it helps you to understand some of the experiences that you've had so far on your journey and some of the experiences that are to come. And so this leads nicely, I think, to the subject at hand, which is the voice of God. It is the interpretation of what we as God individualized communicate to our human aspects via our dimensionally greater selves, as I said a moment ago. And while I feel it's valuable for us to progress to the knowledge of our Trinity, now that we know about our duality, is that this knowledge will deepen, enrich, and enhance our lives immensely. So knowing the voice of God, which is referred to in the way that we should, is referred to in the book of John, chapter 10, verse 27. I just want to say, if you don't read the Bible because you think it's religious or it's tied to a particular religion that you're not a part of, I'd encourage you to just have a look, even if you are going to look at it in terms of the scriptures, that the verses that Neville references or I talk about on my channel. So don't have any kind of hang-ups about it. Don't feel uncomfortable about it. Treat it as what it is, which is a metaphysical document rather than a religious one. So I will throw in Bible verses here and there, but feel free to have a look, dip into the Bible as often as you like. You don't have to sort of take it out and kneel and pray and all of that, but just use it as a resource. It really is a valuable resource. So just wanted to say that. Now, so knowing the voice of God, as I said, as it's referenced in John chapter 10, verse 27, is the difference between an awareness of the power that you have and the utilization of that power. It really is a striking difference. So imagine being aware of having all this power, all this potential, all this creativity, and not being able to use it. Well, you're going to be able to use it to the extent that you recognize and can interpret the voice of God and follow what the voice of God is communicating to you. So I thought it would be nice to share 4 fundamental things about the voice of God that you can contemplate at your leisure and hopefully benefit from. But really, what I'm about to share is to help you understand it more meaningfully. And that's really what I want to do with this upload. So let's dive in. So here are 4 things that I think that knowing this about the voice of God will transform your relationship to it. So number 1, I've got some notes here to help me stay focused. The voice of God was transmitted to you before you were born through the voice of your mother. So that's the woman who carried you. The voice of God was transmitted to you through that being. Now, there's some key research that supports this. It's scientific research, it's not spiritual research. So even if it doesn't appear to align on the surface, it really does support these ideas. So, for example, some of you may be familiar with research by Lloyd Silverman and Joel Weinberger. And their research was published in 1985 in an American psychological journal. And these researchers discussed the psychotherapeutic uses of the phrase mummy or mommy and I are one. So mummy and I are one. And it really is fascinating research. So that's research by Lloyd Silverman and Joel Weinberger on the psychotherapeutic uses of the phrase mommy and I are one. And I do encourage you to look it up and see what it is they say about the benefits of that statement, especially as pertains to our adaptiveness. There's also research done on infant recognition of its mother's voice by researchers. It's been done by many different researchers, but the research that I read before doing this upload was done by Mella Bertoncini and Barriere. And it's important to note that the science is secondary to what we're talking about. It's secondary here, but the reason I'm mentioning it is because it helps shed light on the way that we exist as human beings, by which I mean the spiritual origin of our human existence. So we have all of these researchers looking at these really interesting connections between ourselves and our parents, our mothers, whatever it might be, even our relationships between each other. And all of these things have a spiritual origin. So that's the first thing to know about the voice of God, is that on the human side, it's first transmitted to us through our mothers, through the voice of our mother. And this is why the scientists were able to understand that actually an infant recognizes its mother's voice. What we're recognizing is the voice of God, and why there is such power in the statement, mommy and I are one, because a mother symbolizes God birthing us. And that's what that relationship means. And the good news here is that because of this spiritual origin, all of our relationship trauma, whatever the source of that might be, can be resolved by our relationship with God, and not in any religious sense, but purely in its most fundamental sense. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that the voice of God speaks to you in a language that only you can understand. Now, this language is as unique as a fingerprint because your energetic registry is entirely unique. So this is why mysticism tells us that there is work that only we as individuals can do, that no one else can do for us. We fill and occupy an entirely unique space. I cannot fill your space and you cannot fill mine. No one can replace the other. Neville Goddard talks to us about this quite often when he talks about the importance of not being distracted by what other people are doing and focusing only on our own tasks. It also means that if you haven't already, you can start to think about your relationship to religious leaders in different ways. So religious leaders, you'll remember from earlier, are symbolic. And so even they cannot convey any messages from God to you. Only God can do that. Now, I won't go into the biblical priesthoods and things like that, but instead of being controversial for being controversial sake, I want you to take this assertion and run with it. And I hope that it excites you and it emboldens you to look away from leaders. I'm not just picking on religious leaders, but anyone you see as some kind of guide or guardian or whatever it might be in your life. Start to look away from these people and look to your own limitless capabilities by knowing that the voice of God, which is authority itself, communicates to you in an entirely unique way. That's how important you are. That is how significant you are. This entire drama could not function without you in it. And to prove that, God speaks to you, or the voice of God communicates to you in an entirely unique way. So that's the second point. Number 3, speaking to yourself, being of sound mind, which Neville Goddard reminds us is a habit we all indulge in, particularly when we are alone, typifies God speaking to himself because there is only God. So this also means that the voice of God never instructs us to police what other people do. And I hope it's clear that what I do on this channel is to remind you of that. So there's zero prescription for the way that you should live your life or fulfill the mandates you've been given. I'm going to lay it on the line here. If someone tells you that God told them to tell you something, you don't have to believe them. I was going to say they're not telling the truth, but I'm going to say instead that you don't have to believe them. We are all instructed to source our own solutions, which is what it says in the Bible in the book of Philippians chapter 2, verse 12. Source your own solutions or work out your own salvation. Again, this supports the idea of how powerful you are. The fact that you don't need anyone to be able to do what it is you've been put on the earth to do. You have the ability to do it by yourself, and you get the instructions for doing it from God itself, from God himself. Okay, so that's the third thing. And the fourth thing I'd like you to note about the voice of God is that every statement you make that begins with the word I or with the phrase I am, you are making as God. And this really is the secret formula. So that also goes for what you say mentally and what you say emotionally. So remember, emotions and feeling are the most significant forms of communication for us. And so it's incredibly important that we pay very close attention to the I or the I am statements that we make with our emotions. So I'm going to put a link to a wonderful clip on YouTube, which expertly explains the significance of this. It doesn't talk about it, address it directly, but it explains the significance of this. I'm going to put that link in the description box below, so do have a look. So do remember that everything that God says is an immediate fact that will take time to objectify on the human side. So when you make an I statement or an I am statement, whether you say that verbally or you say that emotively or you say it mentally, you are speaking as God what you say is an immediate fact which will objectify on the human side. The good thing is that you do have time in that interval to make any adjustments necessary. So don't leave things and think, oh, just forget about it. I've told myself how terrible I am, how ugly, how unhealthy, how bad I am at relationships, but I'm having a good day today, so I'll leave that. No, you've sown a seed, and it's better that you go and dig those seeds up and cast them in the fire, or do whatever you want to do, pour bleach on them, whatever you have to do. But make sure that you are paying very, very close attention to your I am statements, because when you make those statements, you are using the voice of God. And that's the fourth point. So just to recap, I'm going to go back to the top of my notes here. The first thing is that the voice of God was transmitted to you before you were born through the voice of your mother. And if you are someone who has not had a good relationship with your mother, you can resolve that through your relationship with God. The relationship that we have with our human mothers is a symbol or representation of the relationship that we have as the birthed beings of God. We were birthed by God, and that's what human birth represents. The voice of God, number 2, speaks to you in a language that is entirely unique as a fingerprint. This is very, very important. It means that no one can do what you have been put on the earth to do. And so you must begin to recognize just how significant and important you are. The third thing is that when we speak to ourselves, we are actually celebrating the completion or the absolute causation of God. There is only God. All things emanate from God. Consciousness is God. Everything is God. No matter what it is, no matter how disjointed, how disaffected, everything is God. And when we know that, we can begin to enhance our relationship to the source of all that is. And finally, when we make an I am statement, we are using the voice of God. When we make those statements, those things are immediate facts and they will become reality. And the things that we don't want will show up unless we do something about them. But also wonderfully, we can use that authority to speak into existence emotively in the way that I've spoken about on this channel, the things that we absolutely do want. So to wrap up this presentation, how do we recognize the voice of God then? And what do we do with the information once we have it? So here is my simple answer to those questions. The location of the transmission of the voice of God is Golgotha, or the cranium. So Neville already told us that Golgotha, is the skull. So when you want to begin to recognize the voice of God, the easiest thing to do is to close your eyes. It's nice to do this in a private moment. I also talk about other things like being relaxed, having a gentle smile on your face, feeling generally at ease with yourself. This helps to eliminate any distractions that can interfere with this wonderful intimate moment when we're just having our time with the voice of God. So what you can do is close your eyes and then become aware of Golgotha, or the skull. Become aware of the top of the skull on the inside area of your skull. And if you close your eyes while you're listening to me now, you will notice that that area at the top of the skull is dark. It will remain dark until you participate in the event that Neville talks about. So don't worry about the fact that it's not very bright. That is going to stay like that until you are incorporated into the body divine. And then what you're going to do with your eyes closed is switch to your spiritual or subjective vision and look out through the eye socket space. And the eye socket space will be very bright and vibrant. In fact, it will be as though you are looking at a cinema screen or a television screen. And as you look out, you will begin to see different images begin to form. Don't worry if it doesn't happen straight away. It will happen to the degree that you are relaxed. So while you're tense and while you are trying to apply logic, it will interfere with what you're seeing, with the transmission of the voice of God. But as you begin to relax, these pictures will begin to form. And this is how we mentally visualize. Now, the images you see are the voice of God. And as a very preliminary way of learning to recognize the voice of God. Allow yourself to emotionally experience what you are seeing. Don't interfere with what you're seeing. Don't try to interpret, just emotionally experience. And this is the very first step to recognizing the voice of God. So just spend a few minutes doing this whenever you have time. God speaks to us on this plane, on the human level, through our 6 subjective senses. So they're the sight, the hearing, and so on, the 6 being intuition. And as we develop our use of these senses, the voice of God gets clearer. We'll all be aware that when we first come to this type of work, to metaphysics, to consciousness and all of that, the first thing we're told to do is visualize. And this is why when we're visualizing, that is our first contact or first acknowledgement or recognition of the voice of God. So what we do as we follow the teachings of Neville Goddard, and I there's no one to compare to Neville for me, but there may be people that compare for you. So Neville and others like him, we are learning to communicate with God via the cultivation of the other senses, not just sight. As we do develop these senses, we heighten our power and our strength and our courage and so on. And power pertains to the conscious use of imagination. So that's what I mean by the word power. And so when it comes to what we're supposed to do with what we're being told, remember that what is being transmitted to us are our desires. And remember, this is something I keep saying remember in this. I guess I want us all to remember, myself included, that our desires are things that God has already done, that he's seeking human parentage through us. So this is not something we want. This is something we are being asked to print out, like a 3D printer, if you like. We're asked to allow this thing to move through us into the objective world or into objective reality. That's what a desire is. And that is what the voice of God is transmitting to us. We have been given one instruction and one instruction only when it comes to the voice of God. And that is to fulfill the specific desires that we have been given. It doesn't matter what that desire is at this point. The only thing that we can do if we want to go on to have the experiences that Neville has described is to fulfill those desires. And that is what the voice of God boils down to. I told you it's a very specific thing. I find it just incredibly expanding. It is such a wonderful thing. It's something that really occupies a lot of my time and a lot of my thought. For about 2 years now, I've been working with these intellections. The voice of God has such a specific role in our time here on earth until we are finished with all that we've been given to do. So I hope you've understood everything that I've shared today, that you've enjoyed this upload, and I'll be going to begin to relate to the voice of God in a new and an uplifting way. As I say, please feel free to share your insights. You can do that in the comment section below. You can ask very simple questions. When I say simple, I mean short, no more than a sentence, please, if you possibly can. There's also the option to reach out to me via email, and I'll let you know if I get too many of those. But until we are together again, enjoy hearing the voice of God and obeying what it's, responding to what it is transmitting to you or communicating to you. And until we're together again, stay phenomenally you.